Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: U.S. officials push for increased aid in Gaza as Israeli offensive continues. Hunter Biden faces new criminal charges in Los Angeles. The UN Secretary General invoked Article 99 to push for a Gaza ceasefire. What exactly is it? U.S. criticizes Israel on Gaza civilian toll as UN to hear ceasefire demand. Stellantis blames job cuts at Jeep plants on California emissions rules. U.S. officials push for increased aid in Gaza as Israeli offensive continues. Washington Post. The UN's top humanitarian official has said that the organization does not have a humanitarian operation in southern Gaza due to the lack of resources permitted by Israel. On Thursday, Martin Griffiths, the UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, said that hundreds of thousands of civilians in southern Gaza have nowhere to go. He called the situation a repeat of the assault in northern Gaza, and said that the plan for delivering aid is in tatters. Israel has reportedly distributed maps in the area that divide it into hundreds of numbered spaces, and then calls on civilians to evacuate certain numbered areas and move to known shelters. Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, has said that there is a gap between Israel's intentions and the reality on the ground. However, the Biden administration has not shown any willingness to put pressure on Israel by limiting supplies of weaponry or vocal support. Hunter Biden faces new criminal charges in Los Angeles. Bloomberg. Hunter Biden, son of U.S. President Joe Biden, is facing 9 federal tax charges in Los Angeles. The indictment comes as House Republicans plan to vote on formalizing an impeachment inquiry into the president based on Hunter Biden's overseas business dealings. Hunter Biden is already under indictment for federal gun charges. The new case could reveal evidence supporting GOP corruption allegations and potentially divert attention from the criminal cases facing former President Donald Trump. Biden had previously had an agreement with the special counsel's office, which has since collapsed, under which he would plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax crimes without a conviction. The UN Secretary General invoked Article 99 to push for a Gaza ceasefire. What exactly is it? Associated Press. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has invoked a rarely used provision called Article 99 of the UN Charter to warn the Security Council of the impending humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. This provision allows the Secretary General to bring matters to the attention of the Security Council that may threaten international peace and security. Guterres sees the situation in Gaza as at risk of a complete collapse of the territory's humanitarian system and civil order. Arab and Islamic nations have immediately followed up on Guterres' letter, calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. However, the U.S., which holds veto power, has not supported a ceasefire. U.S. criticizes Israel on Gaza civilian toll as UN to hear ceasefire demand. Reuters. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has criticized Israel for not doing enough to protect civilians in its conflict with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Blinken said there was a gap between Israel's intentions and the actual results on the ground. Israel says it has done everything possible to ensure civilian safety. More than 17,000 Palestinians have been killed since the conflict began on October 7, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Arab states have called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and the UAE has asked the UN Security Council to vote on a draft resolution on the issue. Stellantis blames job cuts at Jeep plants on California emissions rules. Bloomberg. Stellantis is cutting jobs at its Toledo Jeep assembly complex and eliminating a shift at a Detroit Jeep plant, blaming strict emissions standards adopted by California and over a dozen other states in 2019. The company filed a petition against California regulators on November 17, arguing that the state's rules put it at a disadvantage. Stellantis will file notices to state and local governments on November 18, as required under the Federal WARN Act. The 2 plants employ just over 10,000 people, and the company declined to specify how many jobs will be affected. Trump's vow to only be a dictator on day 1 follows growing worry over his authoritarian rhetoric. Associated Press. Donald Trump has vowed to close the border and drill on the first day of his second term as President of the United States, according to a recent report from the Associated Press. The report states that Trump has promised revenge on his enemies, including the media, and has expressed his intention to use the Justice Department to target the Biden family. Furthermore, Trump has pledged to strip civil servants of their protections, impose ideological tests on immigrants, and increase the military's role on domestic soil. The former president has also praised authoritarian leaders such as China's Xi Jinping, Hungary's Viktor Orbán, and Russia's Vladimir Putin. Trump's rhetoric has been criticized by Democrats, who have accused him of being a threat to democracy, and his own aides have tried to distance themselves from his comments. Nevertheless, Trump's campaign has argued that the Democrats' attacks are a sign that they believe their only chance of winning is to go scorched earth on Trump. Journalists' rights group counts 94 media workers killed worldwide, most at an alarming rate in Gaza. Associated Press. The International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, has expressed deep concern over the number of journalists killed globally in 2023, with Israel's war with Hamas being the deadliest conflict for journalists in over 30 years. The IFJ reported that 94 journalists have been killed this year, and almost 400 others have been imprisoned. The group called for better protection for media workers and for their attackers to be held accountable. The IFJ also highlighted the dangers faced by journalists in Ukraine, Afghanistan, the Philippines, India, China, and Bangladesh. It noted a drop in the number of journalists killed in North and South America, but expressed concern over crimes against media workers going unpunished. Africa remained the least affected region, but the IFJ highlighted 3 murders in Cameroon and Lesotho that have yet to be fully investigated. Marking start of Hanukkah, Emhoff condemns anti-Semitism, says Biden and Harris have your back. Associated Press. Doug Emhoff, the husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, spoke at the lighting ceremony of a massive menorah in front of the White House to mark the first night of Hanukkah. He denounced rising anti-Semitism in the U.S. and abroad, particularly amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. Emhoff, who is Jewish, highlighted the fear and pain felt by the Jewish community and expressed hope and resilience. He assured the Jewish community that President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the entire administration have their backs. Emhoff also criticized college presidents for failing to denounce anti-Semitism and emphasized the need for unequivocal condemnation of anti-Semitism and support for Israel. The National Menorah Lighting Ceremony has been held annually since 1979. White House open to new asylum limits for Ukraine aid, source says. Reuters. The Biden administration is considering implementing new restrictions on asylum and an expanded deportation process in order to secure aid for Ukraine and Israel in a supplemental funding bill. The White House and Congress are currently trying to strike a deal to deliver military aid to the two countries while addressing the issue of illegal immigration across the U.S.-Mexico border. Republicans have refused to approve more Ukraine funding without additional measures to reduce illegal immigration, leading to a complex negotiation process. The Biden administration is open to heightening the standard for initial asylum screenings and implementing a safe third country provision that would deny asylum to migrants who pass through another country on their way to the U.S. Another possible agreement could involve expanding a fast-track deportation process known as expedited removal. A bipartisan group of senators is also discussing a numerical limitation on asylum claims. The Biden administration has said it is open to compromise on border security. The Republican-led House of Representatives is scheduled to wrap up work for the year by December 14, leaving a tight window to pass legislation. U.S. and Mexico try to promote trade while curbing flow of fentanyl. New York Times. The United States and Mexico sought to project a united front on Thursday in their efforts to deepen economic ties and crack down on illicit drug smuggling as the Biden administration looks to solidify its North American supply chain and reduce reliance on China. At the conclusion of 3 days of meetings in Mexico City, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced that the U.S. and Mexico would begin working more closely to screen foreign investments coming into both countries with a new working group to weed out potential national security threats. The collaboration comes as the administration looks to ensure that allies such as Mexico are able to partake of the billions of dollars of domestic energy and climate investments that the United States is deploying. However, as the administration seeks closer cross-border economic integration, it wants to ensure that Mexico is not the recipient of potentially problematic investments from countries such as China. Senate goes into overtime on Ukraine immigration talks. The Independent. Senate Democrats and Republicans are negotiating over exchanging restrictions on immigration in exchange for aid to Ukraine. Republicans want to add restrictions to legal immigration, particularly asylum and parole, in exchange for aid to Ukraine. While many Republicans support giving military aid to Ukraine, others do not, and GOP senators hope to extract some concessions on immigration from Democrats. Negotiations have been ongoing for weeks, and the White House is getting involved. Democrats are frustrated that Republicans are trying to tie an unrelated issue to supporting Ukraine, as it risks running out of money to push back against Russia. Putin allies jubilant as U.S. Republicans balk on Ukraine aid. The Independent. Russian state media is reportedly celebrating Senate Republicans' opposition to passing a clean bill to fund Ukraine's counteroffensive as a sign of the U.S.'s wavering commitment to the war. The reaction came after a confrontation between Democrats and Republicans at a briefing hosted by Biden administration defense officials. The Russian state media coverage has been depicted as a favorable turn for Russian forces in the war. However, support for Ukraine is still strong in the Senate GOP caucus, albeit with certain conditions attached. Negotiations on further military aid to Ukraine remain fluid. Japan's close ties with Southeast Asia hold lessons for U.S. Nikkei Asia. The U.S. would do well to learn from Japan's approach to Southeast Asia, as it welcomes Asian leaders to Tokyo to celebrate 50 years of Japan-ASEAN relations, writes Emma Chandler-Tavery, Director for Political Security Affairs at the Asia Society Policy Institute. Japan's patient and generous approach to the region has generated goodwill and trust, and its strategy has benefited the U.S., too. If Washington fails to coordinate its efforts with Tokyo, it risks losing out in this arena of competition with China, she warns. Biden open to policy changes on the border, as his push for Ukraine funding stalls. CNN. President Joe Biden is sending a clear message to Democratic negotiators on Capitol Hill that he is open to striking a compromise with Republicans on border security in order to get talks on funding for Ukraine back on track. During his impassioned speech in the White House's Roosevelt Room on Wednesday, Biden said he felt Republicans haven't been willing to make a deal, though some have since expressed optimism about the direction of negotiations. I am willing to make significant compromises on the border. We need to fix the broken border system, it is broken. And thus far, I've gotten no response, he said as he made a fresh appeal to lawmakers, adding that failure to reach a compromise would serve as a gift for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Final Pentagon bill features Taiwan, AUKUS and counters to China's influence. South China Morning Post. The U.S. Congress has released the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, for fiscal year 2024, which includes provisions aimed at countering Chinese influence. The legislation, which sets the budget and policy for the Pentagon, is expected to pass both the Senate and the House of Representatives before being signed into law by President Joe Biden. The bill includes measures to strengthen cybersecurity cooperation with Taiwan, as well as training and capacity building for Taiwanese military forces. However, it avoids measures that challenge the U.S.'s One China policy. The NDAA also strengthens the AUKUS alliance between the U.S., Australia, and the UK, and includes measures to counter Chinese influence in the U.S., such as closing Confucius Institutes and prohibiting Defense Department funding from supporting entertainment projects that comply with Chinese censorship demands. It also addresses China's role in fentanyl trafficking and requires an audit of the Defense Department's funding to Chinese research laboratories. The final version of the bill omits provisions that would have restricted outbound investment to China and prohibited the procurement of computers and printers from China. Feds calling for Gaza ceasefire face Rubio's insubordination ire. Washington Post. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican Florida, has demanded investigations into over 500 federal employees for insubordination after they called for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. His accusations have been met with pushback from federal labor leader Matt Biggs, president of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. In a letter written to Marco Rubio, Ana Galindo Morone, chief of the Hatch Act unit at the OSC, stated that federal employees are allowed to express their views about issues. However, the Hatch Act prohibits employees from engaging in political speech while on duty or in the workplace. The OSC guidance says that speaking about the Israel-Gaza conflict is not a political activity unless it is tied to domestic electoral support or action. Rubio accused the employees of open insubordination and misuse of taxpayer resources. However, he did not provide any evidence for these claims. Rubio also called for the OSC to investigate the letter for Hatch Act violations, even though the law allows employees to engage in political activity on their own time. House Republicans unveil resolution to authorize Biden impeachment probe. Yahoo! House Republicans have unveiled a resolution to formalize their impeachment inquiry into President Biden, a move aimed at giving the GOP-led committees more firepower to look into his family's business dealings as lawmakers search for evidence of wrongdoing. The 14-page resolution lays out rules for public hearings and directs the committees to produce a public report with their findings. Republicans have been trying to show that Mr. Biden was enriched by his family's foreign business dealings and that he accepted bribes, but have produced no evidence so far that the president engaged in any wrongdoing. Critics say a fumbled rollout of the brand-new RSV shot for babies has pediatricians worried and frustrated. Yahoo! Shortages of a new drug to prevent respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, have left U.S. pediatricians worried and frustrated, just as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, predicts a second consecutive bad RSV season. The CDC met with vaccine manufacturers Sanofi, AstraZeneca, and Thermo Fisher to urge them to speed up production and make more RSV immunizations available for infants. Newborn babies, those born prematurely, and those with underlying health conditions are most at risk. American Indian and Alaskan Native children are also at a higher risk. The new monoclonal antibody shot called nirsevimab was hailed as a powerful tool against infant RSV hospitalizations. However, doctors across America have reported alarming shortages, blaming the pharmaceutical company Sanofi. The CDC has stepped in to help triage doses distributed through the Federal Vaccines for Children program. Sanofi said that truly unprecedented demand led to supply constraints. U.S. touts new era of collaboration with Native American tribes to manage public lands and water. Yahoo! The U.S. government has announced nearly 200 agreements designed to boost federal cooperation with tribes nationwide. The agreements cover everything from fishery restoration projects in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest to management of new national monuments in the southwestern U.S., seed collection work in Montana, and plant restoration in the Great Smoky Mountains. U.S. Representative Virginia Foxx files for re-election to District 5. Yahoo! Congresswoman Virginia Foxx has announced her re-election bid, with a focus on scaling back big government policies and the woke obsessions of far-left politicians. Foxx said she is committed to fighting against government spending that could jeopardize the future of the United States. Hey there, folks! It's your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees world, Dr. Six, here with your dose of news. Let's dive in, shall we? First up, U.S. officials are pushing for increased aid in Gaza as the Israeli offensive continues. The UN's top humanitarian official has stated that the lack of resources permitted by Israel has prevented them from providing much-needed aid to the region. This situation is causing a repeat of the assault in northern Gaza, and the plan for delivering aid is in tatters. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has criticized Israel for not doing enough to protect civilians, but the Biden administration has yet to put pressure on Israel. It's a complex situation, but one thing is clear: the people of Gaza desperately need help. In other news, Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden, is facing new criminal charges in Los Angeles. This comes as House Republicans plan to vote on formalizing an impeachment inquiry into the president based on Hunter's overseas business dealings. It's a sticky situation for the Biden family, and this new case could potentially divert attention from the criminal cases facing former President Donald Trump. The legal drama continues. Moving on, the UN Secretary General has invoked a rarely used provision called Article 99 to push for a Gaza ceasefire. This provision allows the Secretary General to bring matters to the attention of the Security Council that may threaten international peace and security. The situation in Gaza is reaching a breaking point, and Arab and Islamic nations are calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. However, the US, with its veto power, has not supported a ceasefire. It's a tense situation, and the world is watching. Next up, Stellantis, the automaker, is blaming job cuts at Jeep plants on California emissions rules. The company argues that the strict emissions standards adopted by California and other states have put them at a disadvantage. It's a classic case of industry versus regulation, and the employees are unfortunately caught in the middle. Let's hope a resolution can be found that benefits both the environment and the workers. Now, let's talk about former President Donald Trump. He has vowed to be a dictator on day one of his second term, according to a report from the Associated Press. Trump's authoritarian rhetoric has been a cause for concern, with Democrats accusing him of being a threat to democracy. It's a troubling trend, and one that we should all keep an eye on. In other news, the International Federation of Journalists has expressed deep concern over the number of journalists killed globally this year, with Israel's war with Hamas being the deadliest conflict for journalists in over 30 years. The dangers faced by journalists around the world are a reminder of the importance of a free and independent press. Let's hope for better protection for these brave individuals. On a lighter note, the start of Hanukkah was marked by a lighting ceremony at the White House. Doug Emhoff, the husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, spoke at the ceremony, condemning anti-Semitism and expressing support for the Jewish community. It's a powerful message of solidarity, and a reminder of the importance of standing up against hate. Lastly, the Biden administration is considering new restrictions on asylum and an expanded deportation process in order to secure aid for Ukraine and Israel. The issue of illegal immigration across the US-Mexico border has become a sticking point in negotiations, and the administration is open to compromise on border security. It's a delicate balancing act, but one that needs to be addressed. Well, folks, that's all the news for today. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions for me? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.